welcome to the Together podcast. We are your hosts, Mike Elliott and Courtney Wren, where we dive into and explore all the juicy terrain of conscious partnership and conscious parenting. And we do it in our favorite way possible, and that is in conversation with each other, Courtney and I. And then we also love to bring on guests and learn from their world. And today we're really excited to have on a really special guest. She was actually quite involved in the beginning of Courtney and I's relationship as support. And her name is Mel Cassidy. Welcome, Mel.
Hi, thanks for having me here.
Their name.
Sorry.
Their name.
That's okay. Pronouns takes me getting used to sometimes.
Yeah. I know I've had to really stretch that. Yeah. Yeah.
You even told me.
Yeah. The practice. It's a good consciousness practice. A good consciousness practice.
Do you want to intro Mel a little bit more?
Yeah. So Mel has a really beautiful brand called Radical Relating. And they work with folks you have the Monogamy Detox and really coming into alternate ways of relating consciously. And what Mike and I really feel inspired about what you do, Mel, is that you really are weaving the polyamory world, these other ways of being in love, right? Embodying love and relationship, but really informed by trauma informed and attachment informed. So really grounded in like what actually brings in an ability in our bodies and in our nervous systems to come into safety and to heal in relationship. And so this is such a juicy space to explore. Mike and I have so many questions, and we'd love for you to just share anything more about who you are, your world, what's important for our listeners to know about you as we dive into this conversation.
Thanks so much, Courtney.
Yeah.
There is so much I could say about my practice. I think one of the interesting things for me is that, I mean, my practice as a coach, as you said, it's very much grounded in those trauma-informed practices and somatics. I think I endeavor to be the person I wish I had 12 years ago when I was beginning in my journey.
Right.
Because I think there is a lot of hot mess that happens when we're trying to break out of the molds of conventionality. Right. And I think a lot of people get curious about non-monogamy because they're like, well, that doesn't sound very conventional. And I've tried monogamy and it didn't work out for me. And I want to do something different. And polyamory is not the end place for everybody. But I think along the journey, a lot of people get stuck in what I call messy non-monogamy.
Yes.
And they kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yes.
And I'm like, do you imagine that there's no such thing as messy monogamy as well? And which of course we know there's lots of messy monogamy out there.
Lots of mess, lots of just general relational mess.
and I think I'm also very informed by, as a queer person who, has really only come into my queerness since I turned 30. That journey of learning from the queer community, also reclaiming like my cultural identities and learning from that too. It's been, okay, how do we actually bring more groundedness into the practices of non-monogamy? And I extend that to be anything other than compulsory patriarchal monogamy, because I think there's a lot of space for, okay, well, we know there's traditional compulsory default monogamy where we're not being conscious about it.
Yes.
And then there's everything else.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to explore in that everything else. And I like to be able to speak to all of that, even if, my niche and where I increasingly find my practice focusing is very much more on polyamory and relationship anarchy.
Ooh, relationship anarchy. Yeah. Yeah. And this sort of like you sort of use the words too. I've heard you like decolonizing the patriarchal constructs of really what relationship is what I'm hearing. What love is, like what love is.
Yeah.
And so
what love isn't.
And what love isn't.
Before we dive into that question, I just want to, for our listeners, when I think of you, Mel, I think of you as the polyamory person. Like if I want to learn more about polyamory, I'm going to you. And so Mel came into my life in the beginning of our relationship because I felt like I felt like the situation was a little bit polyamory. Like our mutual friend, Chris Durkees, was like, hey, Mike, it sounds like you're in a polyamory situation. You need to talk to my friend Mel. they will really help you out. and and so when we started meeting, the thing that you really helped me, because I'm excited to go down the polyamory thing, and I wanted to speak to the place that's personal to me, where it was I I wanted to, for the spiritual enlightenment of it. I was like,
Yeah.
it's more spiritually enlightened to open my heart up and accept the situation that's here. And I just need to own all my triggers in it. And something you really helped me solidify is I came to you thinking, oh, I'm really going to expand my heart and learn how to navigate this. And what it ended up being was, oh, because I think you really helped me realize you may not just be, that may not be your thing. And if it's not your thing, then you can't be a part of that thing. It's not going to be helpful. And so I'm so grateful to you, because I feel like in the exploration of the work that we had, I just got super clear of, oh my God, I am just triggered almost all day, every day in this. Here are my boundaries. I am a monogamous person. And this is why I'm so excited for our conversation today, because I'm always so curious about the world of polyamory. Because it's like if I were to tune into myself, it's the exact opposite of what I want in life. And so I'm always so curious to learn from that other world of like, in my reality, it just doesn't even make sense of how there could be safety and nurturing of an attachment system when there's more than two people involved.
Mhm.
And so thank you for your involvement to help me clarify I'm a monogamous man. And yeah, so that I could bring in, we could explore like boundaries and clarity around what this relationship was going to be.
Mhm.
And yeah, excited to learn now about the deeper terrain and the depth of this world.
Yeah. Yeah. And where I'm coming from is I often identify myself as quite a polyamorous person in my heart. I'm a very loving person. I love to build deep relationship with many people. I love to have that like intimacy and work through my layers of my attachment stuff and my, inner landscape with dear, deep friends, and sort of hold that intention to do that. Although I have to say, when you have a 2-year-old, a lot of that doesn't have a lot of space, and you're like, okay,
Mhm.
little
Mhm.
pause. There's a little pause on the depth, but also beautiful connections. Um, and and so, my journey has been to figure out like what are the boundaries
Yeah.
for myself, right? Like what are the boundaries, and where are the spaces that I'm going into that, and where are the spaces I'm not
Yeah.
going into that? And is that going to be, and that was so much of what I was navigating when we first met you, in the ending of my previous relationship, where we were still exploring how to be connected, not in romantic relationship, but how to still have some sort of, attachment connection,
Mm.
while bringing in a new person, and that I knew that I wanted to journey forward with like a building a family and this sort of thing.
Sexually intimate way.
Yeah, to be
Yeah.
more sexually intimate, but also like building a life, because that
Yes.
also has a flavor to it. Like,
That's right.
I want to build a certain kind of life with you.
Yeah.
And that was so, I remember my insight, was so much around, whoa, polyamory requires a lot of self-clarity
Yeah.
and a lot of boundaries and a lot of clarifying. And so, which is kind of counter to maybe some of, what was the words you used? The messy, the kind of the,
Messy.
yeah, the
Yeah.
messy non-monogamy is like, in the messy non-monogamy, it's like, it's like, let's just let go of our boundaries. Let's
Yeah.
just go into free love, and I've done therapy with people who are kind of in that place. And and I'm like, tell them, I'm like, it's like, actually conscious non-monogamy, it's like, you have to be very aware of what you're needing.
Yep.
Very aware of your
Yep.
boundaries. It's like,
Yeah.
it's actually the opposite of just letting everything go to the wind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think what both of you are speaking to here is how the unconscious version of monogamy. So I would call that compulsory or patriarchal monogamy. And that is very much like a colonial European kind of construct of scarcity. Right? It says that you have to default to this. And once you're with your person, that person is your whole life. Like, we can even look at like the nuclear family as like the more modern expression of that you're in it as a family unit, and it's you versus everyone else. And you have to resource hoard. in
Yes.
order to survive.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think what a lot of people are attracted to in the practices of polyamory and in other forms of non-monogamy too, is the idea that we're no longer resource hoarding, that we are actually allowing for loving expression with other people, whether that is sexual or not. That's a whole other thing. And I think it's very interesting when you get into the intersections of asexuality and aromanticism with non-monogamy, people who are asexual and polyamorous. It's not about the sex at all. It is about the loving connection. And if we think about how we lovingly connect with people in our lives, are we exclusive with that or not? I think for some people, they are more exclusive, or they feel more reticent to build emotional relationships beyond their romantic partner. But I think we've got more and more materials coming out about the idea of having what's called queer platonic relationships. There's a wonderful book called The Other Significant Other, which came out, I think it was at the end of last year, which is beautiful. And it's like a celebration of the idea of deep partnership within friendship. So it doesn't have to be a sexual or romantic relationship, but there is a kind of feeling of romance in there. And so I look at things like that, and I think about how many of us have been drawn to have curiosity about polyamory. And as you describe yourself, Courtney, like having that sort of polyamorous spirit to them, because we don't want to hoard. We have that sense of, I cannot just put all my eggs in this one proverbial basket. I need more. And when it comes to attachment, what I think is really interesting is that as human beings, we didn't evolve, we didn't emerge in the nuclear family. We emerged in communities. We emerged in villages and tribes, and within that, a child wouldn't have had just one or two attachment figures. A child would have experienced a level of secure attachment with all of the adult caregivers and also the land that they were on and the animals that they were around and all of those things. And so I think that there is something in us that innately is attuned to this idea of we are seeking out an attachment network. We're seeking out that village, that community. And for some people, the path to that looks like polyamory. For some people, the path to that looks like relationship anarchy. And I can talk a little bit more about what the differences there are. And for some people, the path to that is conscious monogamy in their sexual relationships, in terms of like practical life partnership, like I think the two of you seem to have now, but not limiting the depth of connection that they experience outside of that partnership. And some of the most beautiful examples I see of this are when people are in a partnership, but they also are there in service to their community, or they have a very strong network of friends. There's a very strong sense of village in terms of like, our kids are all growing up together. And I think that could be seen as a form of non-monogamy, because it definitely counters the nuclear family idea. But I think there has to be spaciousness for that. And I think that's something that a lot of people are craving.
And I feel like that really is like what Mike and I are living, right? Is we're living a very like polyamorous life in terms of like, even just our son has so many aunties and uncles that see him all the time and that have their own bond with him that's like, not with us. And then, they're in our home, and Mike's having a deep ongoing connection, with our friend who is with, and they have a deepening intimacy. And, the boundaries are clear for us. Like the boundaries are, we're the ones building this life, we're being sexual together. And but then there is this deepening, this emotional deepening with different people and different interconnections. And And I just want to name, I can see how for so many monogamous couples, that would be scary, like that level, like letting your partner have
Yeah.
but
Patriarchal.
letting your partner, have that kind of intimacy, having other people in your home, having village where, you're sharing really deeply about maybe even what you're processing about, in yourself. And there's a lot to move in that in people's attachment system.
Yeah. And that very much is coming from that patriarchal model because, and I just want to name here, like patriarchy harms men, right? Like patriarchy says men are not allowed to have close, intimate, emotional friendships unless it's with their sexual partner, right?
Yeah.
That's one of the stories that patriarchy gives. And we have this whole concept of emotional affairs, as if having an emotional relationship is bad, is cheating. And there's a great book, if people are kind of in that space of curiosity of, am I non-monogamous? Do I just want something else? There's a great book called Designer Relationships. And the authors, Mark Michaels and Patricia Johnson, they have a background as biologists. They're also tantra educators, but they're also biologists. And so they have this wonderful way of just kind of looking at it in terms of like, this is what we see in nature too. People can be exclusive emotionally. People can also be exclusive in terms of like the way that they nest. And I have a friend who has a PhD in birds, basically, and she talks about how birds are actually very rarely monogamous. They might have only one nesting partner, but when they look at the paternity of the offspring, the paternity might be different. People can be exclusive. So people can be exclusive emotionally. People can be exclusive in terms of who they nest with. People can be exclusive sexually. People can be exclusive in terms of the way that they socially show up together. But that doesn't mean that they can't have multiple relationships in other dimensions. So that's something I really build on. I look at it in terms of, we have all these different ways that we relate. We can relate erotically. And erotic can include sexual, but it's not limited to that. I think the erotic space is also for a lot of people a spiritual space, is a creative space. There may be people that we have an incredible creative, collaborative connection with, and that it feeds a similar part as our eroticism does. We can connect with people emotionally. And I think a lot of us find there is a huge capacity for emotional connection. And having emotional depth doesn't need to mean that there is a sexual connection. And I think in our current Western society, there's a lot of conflation of those. And again, I think for under sort of that, the patriarchal rules that limit our exploration of emotions, that is very common too. We can live in community. We can have multiple people in our lives that we share resources with. And I think in the current economic reality that we're in, a lot more people are getting curious about that. Collective living, resource sharing, carpooling. Where I live, there's a wonderful tool library where, you don't have to buy your own tool for every single household. You can just have a collective and you borrow it when you need it. And I think things like that are incredibly practical right now. And of course, there's also just the idea that we can build that community, that we don't have to isolate ourselves or silo ourselves into our little units, that we are actually stronger together. And I love seeing what's happening in the world right now with a lot of these collective action movements coming up, and the camaraderie that people are finding, the connectivity that people are finding. I think the last few years with the pandemic and everything has, as much as it has polarized people, I think it's also helped people to find the spaces where they can belong. And people are realizing that they're less isolated than they thought they were, which is very empowering.
This conversation is making me realize I am a non-monogamous.
I said to him,
kind of blowing my mind. Like, oh my, yeah.
Yes.
What I'm seeing is just within the boundary of really just sex, like
Sexual, and then also just who you're building. We're building a certain thing together. We're co-creators. We've decided to co-create a certain thing together.
Yeah.
And then we're sexually monogamous.
This is blowing my mind.
But then also, like, I think a layer though that I want to speak to, and this is what I'd love to dive into, is like, okay, so if you have let's say you have a primary attachment, or you have a, and you want to explore non-monogamy, or you want to explore polyamory in whatever way, is, I think another layer we have is a devotion to ensuring safety in our bond.
Yeah.
So for example, I'll describe like what this looks like in us, and then I'd love to hear you dive into this, is, Mike has beautiful close relationships with other women, where they're messaging and, women before he knew me, and that's felt beautiful, and I've loved supporting it. And then there's been places at times where I can feel my attachment system gets triggered or feels unsafe, especially too when Mike started to work with women, when he started to announce himself. This is actually where it came in for me more, was when he was advertising himself as supporting women in intimacy, emotional intimacy, and he was supporting women. And the classic thing, right? Like I'm like mothering, and I'm like, I just would love some attention. And then Mike's like in the other room messaging, emotionally connected.
Helping them feel their relationship to the masculine.
And of course, he's not doing anything wrong. But like my attachment system's like, I don't like this. Yeah. And so, but I guess what our commitment to this has been to be honest about that.
Yeah.
And then to be partners in how do we help reestablish some safety here? Like, so that partnership of Mike being like, oh, your safety matters. Not that he's going to give up, what feels right for him, but there is this like co-negotiation of like, whoa, how do we reestablish some safety for Courtney's attachment system, so that I just don't go into like, well, I'm going to just pull away now, and I'm actually going to avoid intimacy because I'm feeling unsafe. And so, for us, like, we have that agreement, like that maintaining safety. And that's a curiosity I have, is for people when they're navigating, intimate, like this way of relating, how do you establish safety together?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the challenges in non-monogamy is that we are taught that the primary strategy for safety and security and stability is monogamy.
Right.
And so even just the act of opening up a relationship can feel very destabilizing. I find a lot of people, even when they're like, this is what I want, I know this is me, they feel like the rug is pulled out from under them.
Right.
And so, I think part of that can be if we're moving too fast. So going back into that somatic wisdom of, trauma is too much, too fast, too soon. How do we slow this down? And then also looking at what are the other ways that we are supported. I think when we've been doing compulsory monogamy, when we're used to that being the only strategy, we might have, we have a lack of resilience, basically. We don't have these other tools in our toolkit. And I find a lot of the work that I do with people who are, at the beginning of that journey and opening up is about what else is in your toolkit. Who else do you have? You cannot do this journey alone. I think part of that journey is coming into more conscious awareness of yourself, what I would call self partnership. And Jessica Furran calls it self-secure attachment. And so I think that's a big piece of this, but also, who are your peers? Who are the other people who are going through similar things that you can go to when you're freaking out and get a little bit of co-regulation with, that are not your partner?
Yes.
Who are the people you can go to who are maybe elders or coaches or mentors, who got a little more experience and kind of help you situate yourself and be like, yes, it's scary right now and you're freaking out, and this too will pass. Who are the healers you can go to who are going to support you in reintegrating back into yourself? Because I think one of the hardest things that happens, and I always find it very heartbreaking when I see this going on, is that in that initial panic of, oh my gosh, what have I done? Like, I thought this was going to work, and now I feel scared and I'm insecure because I've broken my monogamy. Am I going to be a failure? Have I failed at everything? we might retreat from parts of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And when we retreat from parts of ourselves as part of that safety and defense response, we are no longer showing up as a fully integrated and authentic person.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, that can wear us down. I compare it to realizing there's a pebble in your shoe. And I might go for a walk. There's a pebble in my shoe. I have a choice. I can take my shoe off and shake out that pebble, or I keep walking. And very often we will keep walking and then we grow numb. We forget that there is a pebble in the shoe. And then we blister. And when we blister, we cannot walk anymore. So a lot of people will jump into non-monogamy, not realizing that they don't even have an actual secure, safe system. They've
That's right.
got a coping mechanism that is based on one person.
Yeah. And so, yeah.
The codependence, like they've
Yes.
been in a codependent, this is
Yes.
a word we use. They've been in a codependent relationship. They're like, oh, we've got some great safety, that's what it feels like in that codependence. As they really go into differentiating, like moving into their own energy to move into another relationship,
Exactly.
all of the parts that actually haven't been individuating or differentiating or landing in ourselves, they come out.
And it's a functional dysfunction, right? It's
Right.
like it works fine so long as you don't question it. I
Yeah.
think, a lot of like assumed gender roles are like that too. It's like it works fine as long as you don't question it. And
Right.
maybe it works for some people, but it's not going to work for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something about, going back into attachment, when we feel intimate with somebody, we feel that intimacy, there is that beautiful sense of co-regulation, and there is a sense of merging, which I think is very similar to what we, hopefully as infants experience with our parents or adult caregivers. And we might confuse that experience as meaning that we are in relationship. But the real relationship does come through that process of differentiation, which is, comparable to as infants, we separate from our parents, we become our own individual selves, we create that sense of selfhood, boundaries, agency, and so forth. And it's only once we can really get to that place of differentiation in ourselves that we can really know that we have secure attachment experiences in relationship.
Yes.
Yeah, which in the beginning, really, that only happens if like mom or papa or whoever the adult figure is safe enough in their own body to be able to differentiate from. Where it's like the little one, if there isn't safety, it's almost like that differentiation or that moving away doesn't happen because of the panic and the terror of like something's wrong, but then reaching and reaching and reaching and like, but there's actually a part that's never available to connect to. And I think from my lens, that's where I can see with so many of my clients where it's like there's that part that's still looking.
Yeah.
But it's like, oh, it's like orienting that younger part, that's the language I use is orienting that younger part of like, oh, little one, like that's you need to come back and I'm here. And then I'm going to take you to another person, like what you talk about, the team of people who have the qualities that were missing in those early stages of development that are now available, that like in my journey I can parent that younger part, recognize, oh, there's distress there when we're looking somatically, like, oh, there's either dorsal shutdown or hyper arousal, and it's like, okay, I'm going to take you to someone you feel safe with. Now you can be met there and integrate into that like more mature place.
Which for us, like that, I remember at the beginning of the relationship, hey, I don't know if it's okay if we go into this, but we're
No.
we have a
That's
time.
That's the safe piece. I'm just testing it, making sure it's online. I'm not in the no.
We're like, how could we subtly show each other if we're going into something that's not comfortable? We're like, no. is I had figured out that secure network thing. So I had like such a I had learned that piece, and so we started to enter into relationship, and so I would build this bond, but then I would really reach into my network, and that was really
Oh my God. In the beginning, I was terrified
uh-huh.
because I was leaving like northern Alberta, living a whole life of isolation, just finished a relationship a couple years before that in total codependence. And so entering into the Khorokhane Valley,
Yeah.
into Courtney's
The
world,
Courtneys.
who everyone who knows Gene Keys in human design, she's got lots of fours, which means really networked and
Yeah.
lots of people
Yeah.
intimately, and it was terrifying.
Uh-huh.
But what I like that you said, and this is bringing that somatic piece, and I think this is the invitation, regardless of monogamy or not, is like what's happening in my nervous system in relationship to my partner, and like what am I needing? Because in the beginning, and thank you so much, God, Courtney in the beginning really did bring in, like I'd say, how I experienced, and you tell me if it's different, is like where you did pull lots of you back for a period of time for me to integrate how different the reality was that I was entering, because for my nervous system and attachment system it was just too much.
Yeah.
You said too much, too fast, too soon.
Yeah.
Like I can't, I'm just a little baby freaking out here. I
Yeah.
can't, like there's not a man to relate with if it's going this fast. I need it to slow down. I need to show that that there's the prioritization of this bond, as Stan Tatkin talks about, is nurturing this couple bubble. And then the more that happened, and it's still an ongoing thing, but the more that happens, I can then go into, my somatic therapist. I can go to my brothers. I can go to my men's circle. I can go to the people that help integrate all those pieces, so that I'm like, yes, expand out more with your heart and relate intimately with those people.
Well,
I
and
now hold that and welcome that.
I wonder if there's a little piece of something going on there that has to do with what I call the monogamy hangover, which is that, we tie a lot of our self-identity to how we show up in partnership. And again, one of those stories that we inherit from patriarchy is I am only good as a partner to the extent to which I can be the support for my partner.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Like the only support,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I encounter this a lot, and it seems to be a bit of a challenge for a lot of people, where if their partner is very self-sufficient, they go, well, what do I bring to this? How can I support this? To pull in a very relevant like pop culture reference, I've been watching Bridgerton, which I'm like, I love it. It's like the opposite of everything I stand for, but I love it. And there's a wonderful line in the third season of Bridgerton where one of the characters says, but like, what do you need me for if you have all your own things? What do you need me for? And I was like, oh, that is such a powerful moment of writing and everything, because I think this is a reflection for all of us that we do kind of go, I'm supposed to, I should be this person. And that narrative really feeds into codependency. I'm a fan of interdependence. We do need each other as human beings. We are relational creatures, but what is it that we need each other for? And to heal that part of ourselves that says I'm only worthy if I'm worth something to somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah. Or offering it's in a way, this is where we're actually being invited, that we're lovable just by being, right?
Yeah.
Like this is like, I'm lovable just by being, but any parts that are like, but I'm not lovable just by being, are like, this feels really threatening. And for me, like the reason I was doing that at the beginning of the relationship, and I do continue to do it, although I have to say, being in the, like, it's just the landscape looks different when you have a little one that you're parenting, because there's not that kind of spaciousness to go, but you do need, but I still lean into people a lot, but it's more like, hey, can you come hang out and we'll hold space for my baby together, is more what it looks like. Will you help me parent together? But this place of resourcing self with, we find it helps us not get stuck in whatever patterns can play out, whatever we can be projecting on each other. Go meet with another person. I remember when you started to be like, oh, I'm actually loving now when you go connect with all these other people, because you come back and you've had insights, you have awarenesses, all of a sudden something that was sticky, like it's easier to move through. And it's like, yeah, because you're connecting with other nervous systems, you're getting perspectives, you're getting other parts of you nourished. And that's something we really recommend a lot to our couples we're working with when they're just gotten really insular, is like, you really need to, or what do I do when my attachment system's freaking out and he's not available? It's like, you need to build that secure attachment network. I'm going to use those words now, is building that network, because who else can you reach out to? Where can you find some regulation?
And I find it so interesting that in modern culture, we've pathologized that.
Yes.
I don't hear it so much anymore, but maybe that's just my own little echo chamber. But a lot of people have, I think, historically pathologized things like polyamory as being like, oh, you're just afraid of intimacy, or you're avoiding commitment, or you're only doing this because you're a wounded and traumatized person.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yes, I am a wounded and traumatized person. And what's wrong with me exploring things that are going to support my nervous system?
Yeah.
I come from a family with lots of intergenerational trauma, that are diaspora, that cannot go back to their homeland. And it's like, okay, so what do I do? There is always in me been this innate quest for belonging, for community, for connection. What's wrong with me exploring the different ways that I can do that? I think where we can look at how it happens unconsciously, and again, the sort of messy side and the dysfunctional side, and I think there's that saying of tragic expression of unmet needs comes to mind. There are definitely moments in my own polyamorous journey where it's been like, okay, yeah, that was a lot of unconscious stuff coming through in maybe not the best way, but if I can approach this from a trauma-informed perspective, if I can listen to my nervous system as I do this, then I'm actually connecting not just with one partner in a conscious way, I'm connecting with all of my relationships in a conscious way, which I think is so important, because I see a lot of the conversation around conscious partnership, and not you guys. You guys don't seem to be doing this, but you've probably seen this too. A lot of people are doing that conscious partnership at the exclusion of all else.
Yes.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah. Whereas like for us, that's why it's together as our brand, but also sacred relating, because it's like really how you're relating with everything, with the planet, with
exactly
with everything.
Your animals, your actual physical body,
yes,
land, all of it.
Yes. So here's a curiosity I have in this realm is two things, because one of the things we really talk to people about is, in order to unwind in a relational space, to unwind some of those really early, attachment things, that some sort of commitment or agreement or clarity together is important in terms of, so that, because let's talk more about the unconscious, in the unconscious place, it's like, where our attachment system, especially if we've got disorganized or a lot of avoidance, we can be like, yeah, I love you. And then all of a sudden the attachment system goes into something else. And it's like, yeah, no, I don't love you. And just this constant messiness of like kind of following whatever is emerging in the nervous system and being like, no, I'm just going with the flow and we're flowing. But the heart, like the hurt that can happen in there when there isn't some sort of, this is how I'm seeing it, some sort of agreement, some sort of ground to rest on, of like a deeper commitment, And, I think in monogamy that people can lean into, well, we're married and this is what this looks like. A lot of that can be unconscious, but, for Mike and I, like our commitment is to keep returning to love, and that we have a vision and intention of what we're co-creating together, and to keep showing up for that, to keep showing up for each other's healing, And even as I'm saying this, I'm like, right, we're not like being like, well, we're married, so that's what it is. We're being like, we've created our own agreements. We have our own, but there is a level of commitment that keeps bringing us back. And I wonder what that can look like in different ways, in different relational containers.
Can I just add before you answer that, how I experience that is, we talk about the third entity as the soul of the relationship. And I'd say our mantra of return to love is the solidity of that soul of our relationship. And then with everything that comes up within that is actually up for negotiation.
That's right. That's right.
Mhm.
Like our sexuality, like as we like, because this is what I find, and I love this conversation because what I'm hearing kind of at the in the foundation of it is it's like trusting the pace of what's needed in the nervous system and the attachment system to be
Yeah.
able to expand as a
Yeah.
human being,
Mm-hmm.
and then how to relate together in that place.
Yeah.
And so it's like it's not a blanketed, well, I'm non-monogamous or I'm monogamous. It's like where are you at in this moment, and what's
Mm-hmm.
the journey of unraveling? Because what I notice is the more safety and we develop by honoring the soul of our relationship, there is a little bit more space and
Yes.
freedom to be more intimate with more people,
Yes.
to
Yeah.
go, farther away from the nest. And then that actually adds to the intimacy of our connection.
Mm-hmm.
I
Cool.
love that soul of the relationship idea, because I always look at it as like, yeah, you have two people, but the relationship between them has its own dynamic and it needs to be nurtured just as a child would need to be nurtured. And so I think there's a few different aspects to this. I always look at it in terms of what is the North Star, right? You're in a relationship, so it's a ship. You're in a ship. Where's that ship going? How do you navigate?
Mm-hmm.
And the North Star can be different in every relationship. And I think where you start is figuring out your own personal North Star. For me, when my journey in non-monogamy began, I had tried my best to do monogamy and it did not work. It was just not for me. And so I separated and in an amicable way, and then I really embarked in my non-monogamous journey, but I was clear that I didn't want a primary partner.
Mm-hmm.
But I felt a little kind of like a piece of flotsam floating on the water. I'm like, where is my anchoring here?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And so I made a commitment to myself.
Mm-hmm.
I decided to be my own primary partner. I would have an orgy with the universe, but I'd be my own primary partner. And I spent years figuring out, okay, well, what does that mean for me? What is my commitment to myself in this? And then in my relationships, what am I then committing to based on that?
Yes.
And I think, depending on the connection, that North Star may be very deep and profound, or it may be a little more lighthearted.
Mm-hmm.
I've had relationships where the commitment is that we're going to show up in kindness.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to show up in compassion. Whatever happens, we don't know what's going to happen. But we
Right.
commit to show up in compassion and kindness and listen to each other.
And then that's the anchor. That's the commitment.
That's the anchor.
Yeah. And so the form of the relationship may change. And I think this is one of the big pieces for me about, my own monogamy hangover, no longer defining a relationship success as it stays the same forever, which I think is what a lot of us have internalized.
Mm-hmm.
And then that fear comes up the moment we feel change. It's like, oh my God. But a relationship can change form. It can move through those different quadrants. A relationship can start off as friendship, and then maybe it becomes sexual, and then maybe it's no longer sexual, but then we actually become roommates, right? Like, and I've had that happen to myself a few times. And there's something lovely about the dance of that, because then what we're committing to is, what is the quality of connecting I want to have in my life
In this moment.
Yeah. And for me in my own relationships, I'm still in a primary partnership with myself, and my commitment is to show up in authenticity as much as I can, to really work on integrating all the parts of myself so that I can show up authentically. And I want to support the people in my life and support them by sharing my skills with them, but also, I want that commitment to, we're here together. We're present to each other when we can be present. And there's also spaciousness. If you can't be present, that is also okay, but please communicate that.
Yeah. So there's what I'm hearing is there's a greater commitment to tending the relationship.
Yeah.
Like, whereas when I think of like maybe an immature approach to this would be, I'm just going to follow whatever I feel, not really think a lot about the impact because I'm following what I feel. This is, I'm deeply journeying with myself, and I have care and intention of how I'm going to tend this relationship in whatever way it shapes or looks. Yeah.
And this doesn't negate the possibility of more pardon me, like lighthearted or
Mhm.
casual relationships. You know,
Mhm.
I think about the swinging community, for
Mhm.
example. And in swinging, people are having a casual sex without commitment, without dating. And yet you can still have care. You can still
Right.
be emotionally present. You don't have to be emotionally available
Right.
beyond that moment of connection, but you can still bring in consciousness and emotional presence to that moment.
Right. And I suppose where the intention would be too is in that case, there's a shared agreement around that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the expectations are clear.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Yeah.
I think when we are feeling a little confused and messy in our nervous system, we will kind of fall into the like, well, I feel a spark with this person, so that must mean something. So we have
Uh-huh.
to be on that trajectory towards a thing. And we don't have to be on that trajectory. We
Mhm.
can choose where we want to go with something. And I think that's about recognizing our own capacity.
Mhm.
I think what a lot of people run into in non-monogamy is they'll kind of have an early stage of feeling like a kid in a candy store. Maybe they just want to like Pokemon and catch them all and date all the people, and that can feel very intoxicating and exciting. And I think for a lot of people, that's a healthy kind of making up for lost time.
Mhm.
And then they go, oh my gosh, this is exhausting. I don't actually have the capacity for this. And then
Mhm.
some people are like, monogamy was way simpler.
Mhm.
Um,
Yes.
like monogamy is simple. Um,
Uh-huh.
but but you know, I think to go into like what is your capacity for connection?
Mhm.
And like what you were saying, Michael, like you have capacity for emotional intimacy with a lot of people, but your capacity for sexual intimacy is not
Mhm.
that.
It's
And
so,
that's
yeah.
and that's not, and you know, to say it's less capacity isn't a critique. It's like my capacity is I want to have this with one
Mhm.
person.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
think it's empowering to honor our authentic capacity. And capacity can change. Like what
Mhm.
you're saying,
Yeah.
Courtney, like having a toddler, your
Mhm.
capacity changes.
Oh my gosh.
And
Yeah.
the ways that you
So much.
connect change. I mean, I think of one, I have a dear ex who he and his wife were married for, I mean, they've had an open marriage their entire relationship. And when they had their son, a lot changed for them. And what they
Mhm.
did was explore what do we actually have the capacity to do
Yeah.
realistically.
Yeah.
And I think it was a little bit of a journey for them to kind of get used to what is this capacity actually. And what it looked like for the wife was she didn't have the capacity to date other people. She had the capacity to grow her support network,
Mhm.
and people who dated her husband were invited to be part of that support network,
Mhm.
which was great. I mean, this kid has grown up with so many incredible adults around him
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
result of this.
Uh-huh.
um, and and for her it was more like, well, I still want to have that emotional presence with people, I still want to have erotic experiences with people, but I just don't have the capacity to date them.
Mhm.
And so they explored what does it look like in that context.
Mhm.
Mhm. What I'm
Yeah, with the
Yeah.
ebbs and flows of life.
Yeah, what
Yeah.
I'm hearing in there is like the almost the evolution of maturity. And this isn't like a hierarchy of like better than or worse than, or, but just really a maturity within the capacity of the nervous system to be able to actually, what I'm hearing is attuned to self to actually know how to relate safely
Yeah.
Mhm.
and have a mindfulness of everyone involved, you
Yeah.
know, because there's a piece in there that makes me think of David Data's work and what you talked about of like in the beginning it can be maybe intoxicating and feel really exciting. I think of that in my 20s where I'm like, oh, this is so fun. Okay, now I want to date another woman. Oh, and now I want to date another. And it's like, oh, but no, God, this is getting really messy. Oh God, this doesn't feel good. But there in David Data's work, he talks about, and I perceive this as another level of maturity is, when there's those connection points and that connection to another person and that invokes energy, it's how to breathe that energy and not have to do
Mhm.
anything about it. That doesn't mean you now need to sleep with that person, be in a relationship, leave your
Yeah.
partner. And I think this is where people get in sticky situations is feeling
Yeah.
shame that there is connection.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Or there is something getting invoked where, like, how I perceive it is like, oh, you're noticing that you have a need, an unmet need, and the qualities of that person might match that beautifully.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean you now need to, like, that anything's wrong with you. You're not a bad person. It's like, oh, yes, that's the benefit of being in a relationship, but then holding the ground of, oh no, and I think it requires, from what you're sharing there, or what it comes up in me, is like that radical secure attachment to self, to know what the boundaries are, to be honoring and respecting what the agreements are in all the relationships, to be able to be like, oh yeah, I feel something there.
Mhm.
And
And
I think a lot of us,
yeah.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think a lot of us hold an unspoken expectation that when we feel connection, that we are obliged
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
do more, that we
Mhm.
are obliged to get onto what's called that relationship escalator,
Mhm.
that trajectory that we're going to this final goal of life enmeshment and partnership.
Mhm.
And it doesn't have to be. And what comes to mind is someone I know, after they got their vasectomy, I was like, so like, how are you feeling with that? And his response was, I didn't know it was possible to surgically remove anxiety.
Mm.
Oh.
Oh, right, because there was so much anxiety.
And what was
Mhm.
happening for him was every time he would have sex, there was anxiety in him about what if she gets pregnant?
Mm. Mhm.
Oh, okay.
Because he was clear that he didn't have the capacity to be a
Mhm.
father,
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
show up as a father in a child's life. And so there was this anxiety there. And as soon as that possibility was no longer there, he was like, oh, I can actually just relax. And I mean, I use that to illustrate as an example, but I think there's many ways in which in connection, there's all this unconscious narrative going on where we think like, what else do I have to do? How else am I supposed to show up? And
Mhm.
it is very liberating to say, this is what I'm available for right now.
Mhm.
You know, I can share with my own life, right now, this summer, I'm focused on writing.
Mm.
I am like incredibly immersed in this process. And, through the last few years of the pandemic, my emotional availability has been focused on my friends.
Mm.
It's been very much focused on nurturing my secure attachment network and my support system and the resource sharing that I have with people locally. And, within that, I realized while I'm writing, I actually don't have a lot of emotional availability for romantic relationships.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So how am I going to put this forward to people? And so, connecting with existing partners, connecting with other friends, connecting with new lovers, and going, here's what I'm available for. I can be emotionally present. I am conscious. I am interested in having like a really deep experience, but
Yeah.
my capacity is here. My priority is this other thing, and my spoons are going towards that.
Mhm.
But I can be emotionally present. Just please
Mhm.
don't ask me for that emotional presence to continue between our dates.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Which really, that is a skill that couples, if you're in monogamy, that's a skill to develop in monogamy too, because there's
Yeah.
gonna be waves, right? Where in your life and what's going on in your lives, if you can establish healthy individuation and differentiation, is that letting each other know this is what I'm actually available. You matter.
Yeah.
And oh, I'm in a phase, where I have to really focus over here. You still matter, but I'm not going to be as available and da 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 da, But being able to voice that instead of
Yeah.
just unconsciously doing it and then, it creating a rupture. It's more just being real with each other in those ebbs and flows. So really what I'm hearing is the ability to be honest with self and really aware of what do I have the capacity for right now? What do I have
Yeah.
available? Do I know we've had a lot of that with me being a mom. It's like, oh man, I don't have that available right now. And with my friends too, I used to have so many long, rambling audio messages of feeling in, and now I'm like, I got 2 minutes. And it can be, but
Yeah.
I'm here. I love you. I'm like feeling you while I'm chasing my toddler around,
Mhm.
like,
Mhm.
but that clarity and how that helps build build the ground. That's another place of ground, I guess I'm feeling in that. I guess another curiosity I have is how would you see this? So how, first of all, like, how would someone know Right. Like in some of these choices I'm making in a relationship, am I coming from more of that, like a younger part of me that's reacting? And like, it's almost like the younger part is driving the ship
Yeah.
versus oh, this is me and my adult self,
Mhm.
and I'm thinking of, and this is how I see it, but you might see it very different. And I want to hear this is where I have seen, where what I'm perceiving is the younger part in someone who's like really scared to go deeper or to be seen in things or to touch on something that's coming up, and their way of coping has been to move away or to kind of keep it more
Mhm.
light, which again, there's nothing wrong with that, but to kind of stay in that lightness. But that what they're saying they long for is more depth, like more like they're longing for connection, but they keep moving into like, I'll go over here, I'll go over there, and in a way that polyamory story can be getting in the way of them actually moving towards what they're wanting.
Mm. Yeah, I mean that kind of like energetic ping-ponging around that we can do is
Mhm.
kind of part of the avoidance.
Right.
Um, I think that, I mean, I see it as something that comes up with a lot of impulse.
Mhm.
It's a lot of impulsivity, not a lot of pausing to check in with ourselves. And I think that ability to pause is one of the places where we find maturity. So I think of how, I mean, when we're activated, we literally, like, our brain separates, right? Our rational brain is not communicating with our primal brain.
Uh-huh.
And can we bring that back online together so that at least there is a moment to go, I need to pause, I need to do something else.
Mhm.
There's another aspect of this which I'm finding really interesting as I'm working more with somatic experiencing with clients, is that what if we find other ways to honor those impulses
Mhm.
so that we can help the nervous system mature? And I think a lot of those impulses, like the lost child never gets to have agency,
Mhm.
right? That child that is screaming, that is crying, that is running away does not get to have agency. And so, what if we support that inner child to have agency and complete those self protection
Mhm.
responses?
Mhm.
And what that could look like is, if you feel like you need to run away, what
Yes.
if you get up and walk?
Yeah.
What
Mm-hmm.
if you take 20 minutes to walk around the block and give your nervous system a reset? If
Yeah.
you feel that fighting energy come in, what if you put your hands up and just slowly push the air away?
Mm.
Does that shift something in your nervous system?
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think when we can lessen the charge of those impulses, then that helps us to kind of come back into a window of capacity where we can go, oh, now I can see myself a little bit better,
Mhm.
right? That maturity is the proprioception, that sense of, I can see myself as someone who's relating to myself, not as someone who's lost inside myself.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, I love that a lot. And when you're sharing that too, it makes me think of how many relationships would actually, in order to develop more capacity, the needed element would be to have more relationships other than the
Yeah.
partnership that's right there. It's
Yeah.
like where it can be perceived of like, I don't have the capacity for all this, like of what's going on between us, but it's like, or like all these other things. But what's actually needed is like, oh, you do need to actually take space and develop more
Yes.
relationships that will cultivate me. Where I watched this in the beginning of my journey is my projection within my own thoughts based off of my trauma and was, oh, that'll take so much more capacity to do that. And then
Mm,
now from where I'm sitting, I'm like, oh, that's the thing that developed more capacity.
yeah.
I
Mhm.
just, my fear and my projection of my idea in my head about it was so not accurate to what my nervous system was needing. I was
Yeah.
needing many different nervous systems and qualities in human
Yeah.
to be able to be accurately mirrored and reflected who I am, because that was a big part of what was missing growing up. So I just wanted to speak to that. And if you feel like, I'd love to hear from you if you notice that, with people that you support or in certain relationships, of where actually bringing in more people would be the thing
Mhm.
that develops more health and safety.
Yeah, yeah. I think that that is absolutely the case. I mean, I find for a lot of folks, I'm talking a lot about, okay, who are your friends? Who's in your support network? Because you need other people. You need to be able to co-regulate beyond co-regulating with your partner. Because when we only co-regulate with one partner, we are not developing a strong nervous system, right? We're actually keeping our nervous system in infancy.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you go back to that idea of a child growing up in a village who has lots of different adults around to go play with, to go ask questions with. Like, that child is learning from all of the adults, not just intellectually, but also somatically. And I think that when you have more people, your nervous system is definitely getting a workout. Like, my goodness, you get a workout. I mean, I find that when my dating life is very full, I may have to make sure that I keep like nights off in between dates, because my nervous system needs that spaciousness to reset. Because when you're going from one person to another, that is a lot of movement. So I think finding a conscious way to do that, finding a way that feels within your capacity to do, that still gives you enough time for yourself, is really, really important. I think what comes up for me when you talk about like this kind of maturing of the nervous system, I think about what happens for people in group sex experiences, because sex is such a deeply intimate, vulnerable space. And of course, in sex, we are so in our nervous system, hopefully. But that erotic energy is very much working with our nervous system. The orgasm happens in our nervous system. And in group sex experiences, at least in the group sex experiences I've been part of, when there is that conscious connection energy going on, there is a lot of potential for healing. There's a lot of emotions that can come up. I've seen a lot of people go into spaces of suddenly having moments of like infant attachment stuff coming up. It's like, oh, there's two people with me. I'm going to suddenly find myself projecting parental roles onto these people. And then what do I do with that? And then I feel left out. And there's a lot of stuff that can go on under the surface. But when it happens in a conscious container, there's something really profound and healing there. And sex obviously is not the only way that we can get there. But I think for people who are non-monogamous, who have, I think, group relationships, who are into swinging, that is definitely a component, that being in such close, vulnerable space with more nervous systems is offering a deep sense of nourishment. The flip side of that, of course, is that if that container is not honored, if there isn't the aftercare, whether that container is an ongoing one or not, if there isn't the aftercare, then it can feel like a rupture. And sometimes it can kind of bring people back into childhood ruptures.
Yeah. So it's like, again, it's like this intentionality of what I often will talk with people about. Not that I go too far into this with clients, but it can come up in different ways, in a way, choosing to enter into these spaces relationally. There, you are making a commitment even in yourself to the care. To not creating more rupture, to the care of, and putting the energy and intention into that, and knowing that that is going to take attention and energy of your nervous system, and to lean into holding that together.
And I love that as a sort of collectively, we're all learning more about nervous systems. We're all learning more about somatic care, and there's more of that coming into the non-monogamous world. And I think that's so valuable. And I see that creating so much more intentionality and consciousness in the experiences, so that people can heal from any trauma from the messy non-monogamy and can actually find more honest, authentic, embodied non-monogamy experiences. I mean, I know for me, that is what I'm here for. And it is an incredible honor to support other people in that too. And I find myself constantly with, more and more curiosity about, and what else is possible in this? What else becomes possible when we actually learn to allow our nervous systems to connect with other people? because I think this is one of the big things that we've kind of inherited from colonial, hoarding, patriarchal mentalities, is that it is not safe to allow your nervous system to connect with others.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it is not safe, but that is not universally true. And how do we develop the skills to know that and to be able to navigate from that space from moment to moment? And what would our world be like
Mm-hmm.
if we could all hone in on those skills of being nervous systems in connection?
Yes. Yeah. And this is so much of what our together
This
work
is
is
our
about.
really-
This is like, how do we actually start to resonate together,
Mhm.
co-regulate together, come into a deeper, not just here, but in our communities, in our, yeah.
Yeah, the work with the clients, all of it.
Yeah, we just love, our favorite is working with other couples. And then we all are in this beautiful co-regulation, resonant
Yeah.
energy together. And it's
Oh.
just so like, it's
So
healing for us. It's healing for, it's just what can happen in that relational field. It's been really helpful too, Mel, as you've shared. I'm realizing how many layers of skill in non-monogamy. There's so much similarity to really what's needed to actually consciously navigate monogamy.
Totally.
Because like I feel like Mike shows up as many different people and it's a different thing every day. And like it's like, and so I had never really thought about it that way, but now it's coming through of like, oh, I can understand the different container and having different people would bring about different learning, but that the skills that you need to learn are still the same relational skills. And if we're coming into real in the moment relationship.
And
Yeah.
I often say that the problems in monogamy and polyamory are the same problems.
Right.
Yeah,
Like
feel-
we are
Yeah.
all dealing with many generations deep of unhealthy
Yes.
stories about relating
Yes, that's right.
that have gotten their way into like under our skin, and we're working on unpacking them and rewiring that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's going to be the same skills.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really just, well, I feel like that amplifies if we were to look at it in the external world. It's like this, I feel like we're exploring here is the returning back to deep attunement to
Mm-hmm.
what's actually happening in the present moment. Like, do I have the capacity in my nervous system to actually attune to all the layers and the pieces and the parts, or do I still have freeze and shut down and numbness and
And that to me is the radical part of radical relating, right? That's why I call my practice radical relating, is because that's going to the roots. We're
Yes.
not just settling for this surface level of what the connection is. We're going into this deep questioning of what's happening under the surface. If
Yeah.
I'm saying yes to this, why? What is my capacity really? What's under the masks of this? What's the essence of this connection?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's the collective healing, coming back to, it's like what we're being asked to do right now on the planet. And the beauty, like what I just love about relational healing is what can heal in that when you're doing it together,
Yeah.
in whatever container, like journey it inside in connection. Yes. So much juice.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for joining us, Mel. Thank you so much for going on this journey. And yeah.
Yeah, I'm so grateful. I'm going to be re-listening to this one probably a few times. There's
Yeah.
been so many like juicy nuggets and like, oh, I noticed these openings in me that I want to contemplate. And so, this is like you just named, like, oh my God, the juiciness, the nourishment to be in connection to other people. So thanks for connecting with us today and
Thanks for doing
sharing
the
your
work you're
wisdom.
doing too in the world, and
Yeah.
how that's awakening.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's awakening space. When I feel into your work, it feels like you're awakening space in the world of relationship for people to be more curious about themselves in relation. Yeah.
I love that reflection. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, and anyone who feels the ping or the pull to work with Mel, I'll have links for Mel down in the show notes that you can go click and follow. And Mel, if you want to share a little bit here.
Yeah.
specifically
You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Radical Relating. And you can find my website, radicalrelationshipcoaching.ca. And then my book, Radical Relating, will be out through North Atlantic Books in late 2025.
Ooh,
Yay.
yeah. Looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. And
Mhm.
thank you all for listening and tuning in. Please remember to give this a 5-star rating if you really loved this content. Maybe share it with a friend. Let this be something that sparks conversation to go a little deeper. And till next time.
Mhm.
Hello, you beautiful humans. If you're still listening, you got a lot of value out of this or previous episodes. Our ask is go down to the show notes, give us some love, click on the donation link there, even if it's just $1. It's going to go a long way. It's going to help us pay our team members so that we can just keep thumping out episodes for you to evolve in your relationships and deepen in love. This is what we're here for. We're going to keep doing it regardless, so there's no pressure. It would just really help us out. In other exciting news, in October, Courtney and I are going to be opening the doors to our Together online community. It's going to be an apprenticeship to deepen in love, to deepen in sacred relationship. And within this community, you're going to be able to curate your entire experience based off of what you're needing. You can come and join the Together community itself, or you can branch off into the additional, Sacred Dudes mentorship, which is for the men, and there's going to be a Holy Mama mentorship that's for the women. You can do just those if you want, or you can do all three. You get to create the experience that you are needing specifically in your life right now. And so if this is something that's hitting you right in the soul, right in your heart, and you feel chills or you're getting some sort of ping that you need to be there, I want you to go down to the show notes, go click on one of our emails, and shoot us a quick little message saying you want to be on the wait list, and we will add you to it.